What we have here is nothing short of a bombshell. Many of you have heard about this already. I had this on my list yesterday. I'm sorry we didn't get to it. A revelation that should be sending shockwaves through the halls of power. On April 9th, House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan sent a letter to Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg demanding transparency about communications between Meta, the FBI, and other government entities regarding alleged foreign influence or election integrity. What followed could have been just another routine exchange in the ongoing tug of war between big tech and government oversight. But what actually transpired was far more explosive. Just yesterday, I guess technically now 2 days ago, Mark Zuckerberg decided to break his silence. Basically, he told on himself. And, I've been critical of how often that phrase, breaks his silence, is used when it's really just meant for someone talking. I think this really does fit the bill of someone breaking their silence, because this has been a source of confusion and curiosity for at least 4 years. So Zuckerberg decides to break his silence not in direct response to Jim Jordan's inquiry, but of his own volition. He sent a letter. Mark Zuckerberg, again, the head of Meta, which owns Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, you name it. He sent a letter that in a functioning media environment would be front page news across the country. It did make news, but I really think this is one of the biggest stories out there. The content of this letter isn't just embarrassing for the authorities involved. It is a full-blown scandal. Zuckerberg admits that in 2021, senior officials from the Biden administration, including the White House, repeatedly pressured Meta to censor certain COVID-19 content. And we're not talking about blatant misinformation here. We're talking about humor, satire, and perhaps most damning of all, content that simply offered a different perspective on the pandemic. Would you think about that? The government reached out to Mark Zuckerberg and Meta and said, hey, those jokes about COVID, that satire about COVID, that opinion about how we're handling COVID, maybe you should take it down. And they did. This is nuts. And, we covered this a little bit with the information that came out in the Twitter files. I was outraged about that then. This, to me, is outrageous. The White House was frustrated when Meta didn't toe the line, and according to Zuckerberg, they applied continuous pressure to enforce their will. He went on to say in his letter, quote, I believe the government was wrong, and I regret that we were not more outspoken about it. I think it's terrible that Zuckerberg went along with this in the first place, but I give him credit for at least coming clean and admitting this. This isn't just a tech company bowing to government pressure, meaning what occurred in 2021. This is a tech company being strong-armed into stifling speech. This is a stark reminder of the dangers of government overreach and the thin line between content moderation and outright censorship. It doesn't end there. Zuckerberg also addressed Meta's infamous decision to block the New York Post story about Hunter Biden during the 2020 election. And this is so important because this was absolutely abominable. Jack Dorsey, who was the former head of Twitter, he had already apologized for this because Twitter did the same thing. But Zuckerberg hadn't said anything about regretting what he did here. And here in this letter, he reveals that the FBI had warned Meta about a potential Russian disinformation campaign targeting the Biden family. Acting on this warning, Meta demoted the story pending a fact check that never arrived. In hindsight, Zuckerberg admits it's since been made clear that the reporting was not Russian disinformation. And in retrospect, we should not have demoted the story. What does this tell us, this whole episode? And if you want to weigh in, feel free. 646-720-0635. It tells us, in my view, that the combination of government pressure and big tech's gatekeeping can have a profound impact on the flow of information, especially when it comes to matters of public interest. It's one thing for a company to make independent decisions about content. I do this. I moderate our Facebook group. And if something is not relevant to something that we've done on the show, I click decline. Or if it's, something that is an attack on another talk show host or something, I click decline. But it's another thing entirely when those decisions are made under the influence or the threat of government power. But let's think about the broader implications here. If the White House could pressure a company like Meta, one of the biggest companies in the world, with global reach, user base bigger than almost every country on the planet, if they can pressure a company like Meta to censor content on COVID, what else might they pressure companies to censor? What other information don't they want jokes about? Are we looking at a pattern where those in power can dictate what we see, hear, and ultimately believe? And where does this leave us as a society? The very concept of free speech is predicated on the idea that we, the people, have the right to hear a variety of viewpoints and make up our own minds. But if those viewpoints are filtered or even censored or suppressed before they even reach us, can we really say we're free? This isn't just about Facebook or Meta. It's about the role of technology in our democracy and the responsibility of both government and these tech companies to uphold the principles of free speech and open dialogue. When those principles are compromised, our very democracy is at risk. I realize that sounds hyperbolic, but I don't think it is. I really don't think it is. Zuckerberg's letter is a wake-up call. I think it ought to be anyway, not just for those in Washington, but for all of us. We must demand serious transparency and some accountability for the people that did this. And above all, the preservation of our right to free speech, no matter how uncomfortable or inconvenient that speech might be for those in power. Let me know your thoughts. 646-720-0635. 646-720-0635. I'll tell you what's coming up. Are you familiar with the story of Rudolf Hess? Rudolf Hess was a Nazi. He was a German politician and a leading member of the Nazi Party in Nazi Germany. And he held that position until 1941, when he flew solo to Scotland in an attempt to negotiate the UK's exit from the Second World War. He was taken prisoner and eventually convicted of crimes against peace. He was still serving his life sentence at the time of his suicide in 1987. There are a whole lot of mysteries surrounding Rudolf Hess and incidents of his life. We're going to get into it with a gentleman who has studied this 6 ways from Sunday, because there are a lot of things about the Rudolf Hess case that don't necessarily make sense, and it's sort of become a haven for conspiracy theories. Right.